everyone, my name is Marcus and you're watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be going through a little bit of bonsai work on my reef tank. It's one of the questions I get asked the most about my tank is how I handle coral warfare and the density of a lot of the corals in my tank, particularly the SPS that inhabit the upper third of my tank. They're really close together, they're growing into each other, and so some maintenance is required to deal with that every now and again. I've got a fairly good sense for the corals in my tank and what can be next to what's more aggressive than its neighbor or not, and I keep a very close eye on things like that. I have to, given how dense all the corals are. And the time has come, it's probably about a once a quarter activity to do a little bit of rescaping with certain corals that are growing quicker than their neighbor, perhaps creating some shadowing or some aggression issues that I need to address. And given the density of the corals in my tank, it is something that I need to keep on top of. So there's two major things that we need to address today. The first is this toxic green Facilipora up the front on the top of my right hand side bombing. There's two things that concern me with this coral. One is its growth pattern. It's tabling outwards rather than growing upwards, which is a stark contrast to the other Faciliporas in my tank. The reason I believe why it's growing in that pattern is because it is directly underneath this kessel with a narrow beam reflector, which makes me think it's probably getting too much light. So it has no desire to go higher, it's going out to try and escape the light. The problem with that growth pattern, particularly in a tank like mine, is that it's starting to shadow the frags that I have underneath it and around the bottom of it, which is not ideal, especially given that some of those frags are really, really nice acroporas that I want to grow. So they need the full light, they don't need to be shadowed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that toxic green Facilipora down about 20 centimeters or 5 or 6 inches to where there's this gap. You can see that red morph inhabiting the gap at the moment. It'll move, no problem. But that is where I want to put that Facilipora. I think it will look quite nice there. It's not going to shadow anything majorly, maybe the acans a touch, but those would be alright in mottled or shadowed light. They don't need super strong light. And that might also encourage this Facilipora to start growing up rather than just plating, because it will be in slightly lower light. The other coral that I want to move is the one behind that Facilipora, which is this bright pink Millipora. This pink millie is loving life actually. It's growing really, really well. Like there's got to be at least 30 or 40 new branches that have come off what was originally a Y-shaped stalk when I first got it. It's growing so well, in fact, that I'm having a similar problem as with Facilipora. It's shadowing its neighbors, and pretty soon it will be touching the big red Monty cap. It'll be touching the very valuable acro frag in front of it. So what I want to do is break the whole colony off the rock, snap the core branch in two, and then probably glue it back together in a slightly different orientation, so that all of those new growth tips and that, which I really love the shape of, but just so they're a little bit more facing away from the danger zone. And also, I'm going to balance the scape a little bit. It's looking very top heavy with the growth pattern that it's currently got, and I want it to look more balanced. So I'm just going to, probably put it back in a very similar position, but in the process of snapping the main stalk and then putting it back together in a slightly different shape, I think it'll look more balanced. I've also identified a spot just behind my two torches where my clownfish is hosting, where I could potentially glue either the whole piece or part of it, depending on how it goes. A lot of this, you can lay your best laid plans, but when you actually come to do it is when you find out what will actually work. So I may end up gluing part of it down a bit lower behind those torches where I think there's a good space for it. Millies can be quite aggressive and they do tend to base quite a lot as well. So that spot's probably pretty good. The torches will hold it at bay and there's no one else nearby for it to sting, and it should have plenty of space to keep growing at the rapid rate that it's currently been growing at. When I start gluing these things back in new places, I'll be using two products. I'll be using Me Coral Gel and the aquarium system's 2-part putty. The putty is really good because it forms a very solid moldable base for larger pieces, and the super glue is good because it sets instantly and it's a really thick gel. So I usually knead together probably a small chunk of this, and then I apply super glue on the bottom and the top of it to form that instant contact bond. You've seen me do this quite a few times before in previous videos, but this is my preferred approach for gluing down small colonies or medium-sized colonies into the tank. It forms a stronger, more adaptable bond than just super glue alone. So first things first, and that's to get out this toxic green Psilopora in one piece. The way I'm going to do that is with these flat edge cutters, which I'll be attempting to get the blades around the bottom of the main trunk, and then hopefully leverage the whole thing off the rockwork. Hopefully it comes away in one piece. I won't be cutting, I'll just be using these to sort of grip the trunk and then leverage it off the rock. Hopefully it comes away easily, but you know, sometimes these things work better than others, but we'll see how we go today. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. So as you can see, we've got the whole piece cleanly off the rock in one go. Excellent. So as you can see here, I've decided that I'm actually going to glue the coral onto a rock, and then I'll be gluing that rock onto my main scape. The reason for that is I needed just a little bit of extra height than the coral's main trunk was going to provide me, so that it can sufficiently clear what its new neighbors are going to be and just look proportioned in the place where I'm going to put it. But also it gives me a more secure mounting point, because this whole surface here is now going to be what I'll be using putty and super glue on to make the bond with my main rockwork. And I'm just waiting at the moment for the putty and super glue here to finish curing. I'm not going to wait too long, maybe just 5 minutes or so for it to get strong enough to be able to then work on this bit up here in the tank. So yeah, just the same general strategy as what I described before, but just a two-phased approach with that intermediary piece of rock. All right, so as you can see, I've got some Aquaforest Protect dip, and I'm dipping some other frags at the moment here that I've been using just while I've been waiting. I've also got my next little blob of putty here mixed together, and I think we're about ready to do this. So what I'm gonna do is put a generous blob of super glue on this side of the rock now. I need quite a bit here because it's a fairly large surface. And one tip with this super glue, if you want these tips to last longer, every time you finish using it, just get a tissue and wipe the end and put the lid back on it immediately, and you should never have any issues of the tip becoming blocked. So just a bit of paper towel, give the end a wipe, make sure there's no super glue on the end, and immediately put the lid on tightly, and that will now be good to go next time I come to use it. As you can see, I've almost finished this entire tube and I'm still on the original tip, so I never have any issues with that as long as you just clean the tip every time you use it. Alright, so now I'm going to take my blob of putty, and it's starting to get pretty solid because I mixed this a good 5 minutes ago, but that's kind of what I want because it was mixed in the same batch as this putty that's already gluing there. And I want this to be almost getting to the point of not being able to be worked with anymore when I put it underwater, because I'm going to need that rigidity to hold this whole piece as I'm positioning it and pressing it into my existing rockwork to make it stay there. It might be a bit awkward, but hopefully we get this done successfully. So all I'm going to do is sort of pancake this out a bit to cover the area that I want covered, and I'm just going to gently put it down I'm not going to knead it in yet because I want the pressure when I'm bonding the two surfaces together to be coming from when I'm pressing it into my rock work. So that's just like the sandwich, let's call it, in preparation. Now I need to take my super glue and put a big blob on the top here, like that. And now, just wipe this, put the lid back on. Now I'm going to take the whole thing. This part here should be nearly dry. It should be much more set than this part. I'm going to be gripping it from here, and I'll be pressing the whole thing down into my rockwork, pressing this bit to mold and conform into the part of the rockwork where I want it to stay, and yeah, hope for the best. All right, sorry about the camera angle there, but it's the best I can do while having the camera out of the way. This is going to be a little awkward, but here we go. So I want this sort of there, with that kind of angled forward like that. I'm just pressing from the rock down. Yeah. And I'm just reaching underneath with my finger and mushing the putty into the rock below, and hopefully I'm not going to have to stand here and hold it in place for too long. Nope, that's not going to work. All right. And as you can see, where I was pushing compared to where the putty is not quite right. So I need to move the putty to a different part of the rock. All right, well, that was a bit harder than I would have liked, but we got there in the end. As you might have seen in the footage, I had to add a couple of extra little rocks in there and another blob of putty to really get the bond on the right angle that I wanted, but we got there. So we've successfully moved the coral from there. You can see some of its base out has remained, that's all right. And we've moved it to there. So with my green Pasillipora now successfully moved from up above just there to down here, the next item on the agenda is this big pink millie, which is just looking a little unbalanced in its current position. It's going to grow into the red scrolling cap over there. I'm just not really happy with the way that it looks. So what I'm going to do is try and break the entire piece off the rock in one big colony, and then probably split it in half straight down the center, and then I'll play around with where I can put the two halves. One option is exactly where it is now, but sort of facing the other way. And then the other option is just here next to my clownfish on that bit of exposed rock there. And I might put one half up here and one half down here. We'll just see how we go. But yeah, I just want this whole area to be a little bit more balanced. And so that's what we're gonna do. Wow, this is bonded really well. I could probably lift the entire bombie up by this coral. Breaking this off the rock is gonna be tricky, I think. Getting the appropriate leverage. Oh, there we go. And see, we just got it. Got it. Wow. This whole coral grew from just a Y branch. And look how big it is and how many tips we've got on there now. So, yep, time to find a new home and position for it. Probably gonna put a piece of it, maybe the whole thing could go here like that, and it might appear to be more balanced. Let's see. If I glued the whole thing right there without breaking it apart, the torches will probably sting it a little bit. Or if we did the higher part, then the torches probably wouldn't reach it. If we glued it on like there, like that, then the torches probably wouldn't be able to reach this part here. And they certainly wouldn't be able to reach this part here. They'd still get enough light. See if I can get it to just stay there on its own. That's actually ideal if you're gluing in corals, is to find somewhere where they want to stay without the glue. It's a really good starting point, and then when you do use the glue, it's a lot easier to get that to bond without having to hold it there for a long time or do weird prop-ups and things like that. There we go. So that's staying there on its own. Let's see. It's not really shadowing anything. This big plating Cyphastria is getting more light than it was before, which is good. The torches are still getting plenty of light. They will blow into the stem a little bit, but I'm not too worried about that. This coral is tough as nails and pretty aggressive in its own right. And most of those new growth tips are above the torches and will continue to be above the torches. I think, so this is an example of changing the plans on the fly, but that's always the way when doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, I think that's the new, better spot for it. That'll give me room to put new corals over the back, over here, that will grow up. We've really cleared up this area to give these new frags that I'm going to be putting around here space to grow. And it's sort of just... frag rack's kind of in the way, but you can kind of see it's just balancing the whole scape a bit better. I really should have taken the frag rack out, sorry about that, but yeah, that's a much more balanced position for it with the overall scape. Alright, so yeah, I think I've decided I'm going to glue it right there where it's sitting under its own weight, which is always good. So I'm going to need to mix up a big blob of putty and just mush it down into that spot right where it is right now. Alright, so I have the coral. It's crazy how much this thing has grown. Like from what originally started as just a frag the size of 2 fingers, really. It was just a Y. All of this has grown, so which is really good. But time to glue it down into a new position as a result of all that growth. So what I do generally is I'll just carefully put the coral upside down, and I'm going to put some super glue, just like I did before, really. It's my preferred technique, so I'm just going to fill the bottom cavity here up with some glue. Almost out, we needing to get more. So just where it's going to be making contact on the new position, fill all this up with a bit of super glue. Like so. And I have a blob of putty that I just finished mixing up. I got a fairly generous blob this time. It is a fairly big coral, so I want to make sure that there's enough. And I'm just going to gently place that on this area, and then I'm not pushing down hard or anything, I'm just putting it in there and gently molding it. The pressure is going to be when I put it in the water and then press it down against the position where I want it. And just to assist with that initial bond, as I'm pressing that down, you need more glue on the top side, or what will be the bottom side. Alright, now this one hopefully will be easier than the last one. As you saw, I was able to position this coral where I want it, and it stayed there under its own weight and gravity. So the goal is to achieve that again, let the coral want to stay where I'm putting it, and then the glue and the putty has to do a lot less work overall. So let's move back over to the tank, and then I'll put this in, and hopefully this will be an easier one. Alright, here goes nothing. Yeah, in we go. Hard part's remembering exactly how I had it before, where it wanted to stay there on its own. And just make sure I'm pressing from a solid part of the coral. I don't want to put too much pressure on the coral's flesh, and certainly don't want to press against any of these tips. They're the most delicate part. Alright, so now I'm just pressing that base down into the rock. That'll force the putty to mold and shape. Any bits where it sort of oozes out, you can just use a fingernail to smooth them back down again. I'll need to look from a few different angles in a second just to make sure it's exactly where I want it, but how's that? Might just rotate it a bit. I think I wanted it more facing like that. How does that look? Let's check from all sides. Looks pretty good. Good enough for the girls I go out with. So, I think that'll do her. Now with all that extra space up in the top part of the bommy now, I'm not going to leave it blank like that for long. Obviously, if you know me, I'm going to be filling that up with coral very quickly. And in fact, I've already got a lot of that coral. A lot of these frags on this frag rack here will end up in and around all of that clear space that I've just freed up. But there we go. But there we go. I think that's enough bonsaiing and aquascaping and repositioning corals for one day. I hope that gave you some insight into some of the activities that I do. I wouldn't say I do this too often. Maybe once every 2 to 3 months I'll do this level of activity in moving corals around. Sometimes it's just a bit of pruning, sometimes it's full on moving them around like I was today. But that's the kind of upkeep that's necessary in my tank with this density of corals and being in such close proximity to each other. the issues of aggression, shadowing, and neighbor compatibility are always something you've got to just constantly address and constantly look at and get a good understanding of over time. But I hope you found this video helpful. If you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in down below, just below the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. My name is Marcus. You've been watching the Reef Nerd YouTube channel. Bye for now.